Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little sootier, the grimy, gaslit world of Victorian London. A city of grand ambition, industrial marvels, and soul-crushing poverty. This was ant the London of Sherlock Holmes, or Queen Victoria's palace garden parties. This was the London of fog filth and foul smells, a place where surviving the day was a small miracle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and the first thing you see is your brother's foot inches from your face, grimy and twitching slightly from some horrifying dream. Welcome to your one and only room. It is not a bedroom. It is not a living room. It is the room, and it is everything you share it with 6 other souls, 1 bed, 2 chairs with questionable structural integrity, and a rat who has been around so long you reconsidering charging him rent. There is no wallpaper, just patches of wall where something used to be. The ceiling leaks when it rains, and even when it doesn't, it drips something that you've decided not to investigate. The fireplace is fake. The air is damp. The floor creaks like it is trying to warn you of your own mortality. You re-wrapped in a thin wool blanket that hasn't been washed since the Crimean War, and the pillow under your head is made of straw, possibly mixed with someone's long-forgotten sock. There is no plumbing. That bucket in the corner, that is the toilet, bath, and emergency water source, depending on the time of day and level of desperation. You've learned to breathe through your mouth in the mornings. It helps a bit. There is one window, if you can call it that, so covered in soot and fog, it mostly just lets in the sound of cartwheels, shouting vendors, and someone aggressively coughing 3 doors down. You try not to think about the fact that the window opens onto an alley where the butcher dumps his offcuts, and your neighbor keeps his goat every morning. Begins with a family-wide shuffle. You dress under blankets. To avoid the cold, you swap spots around the wash basin, like it's a game of musical chairs with fewer prizes, and someone always knocks over the chamber pot. And yet somehow, this room is still home. You know which floorboard creaks, which corner drips, and which window pane rattles just before your neighbor yells about his stolen boots. You know the smell, the dust, the strange sense of belonging. But make no mistake, this room is uncomfortable. It isn't cute. It is a place that prepares you for the day outside by making you suffer a little before you even leave. And trust me, the streets won't be kinder. You stumble out the front door, still blinking sleep from your eyes, and clutching half a crust of bread, and immediately walk face first into a wall of choking fog. But this isn't the romantic candle-lit haze they write about in novels. No, this is London, as infamous pea souper, and it's like trying to breathe through a cold stuffed sock. The sky is gray, the street is gray, the air is gray. You can't see the end of your own arm, and you're pretty sure that as a lamp post ahead, or possibly a horse, could go either way. This fog isn't just weather. It's murderous, formed by the happy marriage of industrial coal smoke and natural mist. It clings to everything. It seeps into your lungs, coats your throat, and gives your clothes that signature London look, soot-streaked and mildly flammable. You cough. Everyone coughs. It is part of the local soundtrack. Like church bells and clattering hooves, children hack like lifelong smokers. Old men cough so hard they rattle windows, and doctors, well, they recommend moving to the countryside, which is great advice if you own land and your own lungs. The smell is a complex bouquet: chimney soot, sewage vapor, horse manure, and last night's overcooked cabbage. If perfume makers bottled this, it would be called Ode Urban Misery. Victorian London, a job is in a title. It is a test of endurance, a way to slowly fall apart while clinging to the illusion of stability. If you a man, you might be lucky enough to land work in a factory 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that would unfeed a well-behaved cat The noise is deafening. The air is full of soot metal shavings, and regret if you lose a finger in the machine. Don't worry, there are 20 children lined up behind you ready to take your spot, doing fancy machinery. Try bricklaying or hauling coal or working in the docks where your back gives out by 30 and your teeth fall out. By 40, if you live that long women, you. Re-scrubbing floors, washing other people as laundry until your hands dissolve. Sewing buttons until you forget what daylight looks like, all for pennies. And when those options run out there, it's always the street, no sick leave, no safety, and no sympathy, maybe. You re a chimney sweep or a mudlark digging through the Thames at low tide, looking for scraps of rope nails or bones. To sell the smell is free. The dysentery also included, or perhaps you there, landed in a workhouse, that magical institution where the destitute are helped by being worked to the bone in exchange for food. So bland it feels like a punishment. You re not here to thrive. You re here to not die too loudly. Jobs come and go illness docen. Tea injury means starvation. There is no workers' comp, no health insurance, and no HR department, just a foreman yelling at you to lift faster, breathe quieter, and stop bleeding on the equipment, and heaven forbid you complain, there's always someone more desperate behind you willing to work, for even less competition is fierce, and compassion is scarce. So yes, you re-employed, but don't get too excited in Victorian London. A job doesn't pull you out of poverty. It just gives you something to do while you re-in it. In Victorian London, childhood isn't a time of innocence. It's as a short window before your back gives out and your lungs fill with soot. If you re small enough to fit inside a chimney, congratulations. You reconsidered employable. Forget toys and bedtime stories. By the time you re 5, you re already working 6, if your parents are merciful. School is a luxury, work is your future, and your present. You might be a chimney sweep crawling through narrow flues, scraping out soot while praying you don't get stuck. If you scream, they'll poke you with a stick. If you stop moving, they'll assume the worst and keep going. Or perhaps you re a match girl dipping wooden sticks into white phosphorus that poisons your jawbone. Until it glows in the dark and eventually falls off to pay a few pence the hazard, bone deaf. A charming trade-off. Some children are mudlarks scavenging through the toxic sludge of the Thames at low tide, looking for nails, rope, anything remotely sellable. You emerge soaked, freezing, and likely infected with something Victorian science hasn't even named, yet others hawk newspapers on the street, shout about roasted chestnuts they can't afford, or run messages for pennies. You run fast, dodge traffic, and hope today isn't the day. You re-trampled by a horse or beaten for looking the wrong way at the wrong man factory work. That is the dream. Indoor steady hours, just ignore the amputations. Children clean under whirring machines. Often, while they still running, you learn fast or you lose. A hand, no safety gear, no days off, no sympathy, just sweat noise and an ever-present adult barking orders. And if you re an orphan, the world doesn't owe you anything. Workhouses, the street, or worse. Some are sold into service, others vanish absorbed into the fog, a footnote in someone else's story. In the eyes of Victorian industry, children are cheap, obedient, and disposable. Childhood is on stolen it. Tests simply never offered, and yet somehow they survive. They play with scraps, sing songs in alleys, and laugh between shifts, between coughs, because they have to. Because in London, even children are expected to carry the weight of empire on their tiny, soot-covered shoulders. If you thought surviving Victorian London was hard as a man, try doing it as a woman. You work all the time. And no, you don't get applause or medals. You get calluses, exhaustion, and a society that expects you to smile while your spine collapses. If you re-unmarried, you might be a domestic servant. That means scrubbing floors from dawn till dusk, hauling buckets of coal blacking, the hearth ironing until your arms ache, and never sitting down unless someone tells you to. You eat last, you sleep in the attic, and if the master gets handsy, well, you should feel grateful. Apparently married It S not better. It S double duty. You clean your own home, likely a single filthy room. Raise children, usually several, cook with nothing, sew everything. And manage the entire household budget with 3 shillings and a prayer. And then maybe you take in laundry from richer households. Boiling, scrubbing, wringing, repeating. Just to buy bread, some women become seamstresses stitching shirts in poorly lit corners. For 14 hours a day, it pays pennies, it ruins your eyesight, and if your fingers bleed on the fabric, you lose the job. And then there's the match factories, where white phosphorus eats through your jaw quite. Literally, you start with a toothache and end with a rotting face. Management says it's your fault for chewing gum. When none of that pays enough, or when you re-widowed, orphaned, or just unlucky, the street becomes the only option. Sex work is legal, unofficially ignored, and socially condemned. You might make enough for food and rent, or you might get arrested, attacked, or worse. Protection only if you count wool gloves, and luck. Women in Victorian London are expected to be quiet, clean, obedient, and always busy. You read the moral center of the home. Even if the home has no floorboards, no heat, and no future, there are no rights, no maternity leave, no safety net, just other women, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, trying to survive the same nightmare. But somehow they do, with grim determination, whisper jokes and backs, bent by centuries of unpaid labor, and still they find time to comfort their children and sweep the doorstep, because someone has to. You might have dodged the horses, survived the soot, and even landed a job, but in Victorian London, you can't dodge disease. It everywhere, lurking in the water, the walls, the air, and quite possibly in the meat pie you ate for lunch. Illness doesn't knock, it sits beside you on the tram, sleeps beside you in your tenement, and sneaks into your lungs while you wait in line for bread. Let's start with the basics: tuberculosis, or consumption as they called it, until it glows in the dark and eventually falls off the pay. A few pence the hazard, bone deaf. A charming trade-off. Some children are mudlarks scavenging through the toxic sludge of the Thames at low tide, looking for nails, rope, anything remotely sellable. You emerge soaked, freezing, and likely infected with something Victorian science hasn't even named yet. Others hawk newspapers on the street, shout about roasted chestnuts they can't afford, or run messages for pennies. You run fast, dodge traffic, and hope today isn't the day. You re-trampled by a horse, or beaten for looking the wrong way at the wrong man. Factory work, that is the dream. Indoor steady hours, just ignore the amputations. Children clean under whirring machines. Often, are they still running? You learn fast, or you lose a hand. No safety gear, no days off, no sympathy, just sweat noise and an ever-present adult barking orders. And if you an orphan, the world doesn't owe you anything. Workhouses, the street, or worse. Some are sold into service, others vanish absorbed into the fog, a footnote in someone else's story. In the eyes of Victorian industry, children are cheap, obedient, and disposable. Childhood is on stolen it. Tests simply never offered, and yet somehow they survive. They play with scraps, sing songs in alleys, and laugh between shifts, between coughs, because they have to. Because in London, even children are expected to carry the weight of empire on their tiny, suit-covered shoulders. If you thought surviving Victorian London was hard as a man, try doing it as a woman. You work all the time. And no, you don't get applause or medals. You get calluses, exhaustion, and a society that expects you to smile while your spine collapses. If you unmarried, you might be a domestic servant. That means scrubbing floors from dawn till dusk, hauling buckets of coal blacking, the hearth ironing until your arms ache, and never sitting down unless someone tells you to. You eat last, you sleep in the attic, and if the master gets handsy, well, you should feel grateful. Apparently married, it's not better. It's double duty. You clean your own home, likely a single filthy room. Raise children, usually several, cook with nothing, sew everything. And manage the entire household budget with 3 shillings and a prayer. And then maybe you take in laundry from richer households. Boiling, scrubbing, wringing, repeating. Just to buy bread, Some women become seamstresses stitching shirts in poorly lit corners. For 14 hours a day, it pays pennies, it ruins your eyesight, and if your fingers bleed on the fabric, you lose the job. And then there's the match factories, where white phosphorus eats through your jaw quite. Literally, you start with a toothache and end with a rotting face management. Says it's your fault for chewing gum. When none of that pays enough, or when you re-widowed, orphaned, or just unlucky, the street becomes the only option. Sex work is legal, unofficially ignored, and socially condemned. You might make enough for food and rent, or you might get arrested, attacked, or worse. Protection only if you count wool gloves, and luck. Women in Victorian London are expected to be quiet, clean, obedient, and always busy. You read the moral center of the home. Even if the home has no floorboards, no heat, and no future, there are no rights, no maternity leave, no safety net, just other women, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, trying to survive the same nightmare. But somehow they do, with grim determination, whispered jokes and backs, bent by centuries of unpaid labor, and still they find time to comfort their children and sweep the doorstep, because someone has to. You might have dodged the horses, survived the soot, and even landed a job, but in Victorian London, you can't dodge disease. It everywhere, lurking in the water, the walls, the air, and quite possibly in the meat pie you ate for lunch. Illness doesn't knock, it sits beside you on the tram, sleeps beside you in your tenement, and sneaks into your lungs while you wait in line for bread. Let's start with the basics: tuberculosis, or consumption as they called it, because it slowly consumes your lungs, your body, and your will to live. The cough is deep, constant, and comes with blood. Everyone knows someone who has it. Most people just keep working until they drop. Then there's cholera, which arrives through your drinking water like a particularly cruel surprise. One minute you feel fine, the next you re-vomiting, dehydrated, and desperately trying not to soil yourself in public. It spreads fast, whole streets go silent. The local pump is chained up too late. By then the damage is done. Typhoid, scarlet fever, diphtheria are regular. Visitors, each has its own personality, but they all share one thing in common: they hit the poor the hardest. If you can't afford a doctor, and you can't, you're left with herbal remedies, homemade poultices, or the magical healing properties of hope, of course. There's always laudanum, a beloved mixture of alcohol and opium sold over the counter. You've got a fever tick, laudanum cramps, laudanum grieving, the death of your 8th child, double dose. You still die, but you die very relaxed. And what about the doctors? Well, they mean well sometimes, but medicine is still guessing with. Latin leeches are still in fashion. Surgery is done without gloves. Antiseptics are a twinkle in. Lister si your odds with a street barber are. And much worse. Disease doesn't discriminate, but your living conditions help it choose you faster. No sanitation, no ventilation, 10 people to a room. It is a perfect breeding ground for microbes, misery, and mold. In Victorian London, if something doesn't kill you fast, it will kill you slowly. And if you somehow still upright, time to refill your water. You sweating through your soot-stained shirt. Your lips are dry, and your throat feels like it's been sandpapered by coal dust. Time for a drink. Sure, but in Victorian London, water isn't your friend. It's a loaded pistol with a porcelain handle. Let's start with the Thames, the lifeblood of the city. It's also the toilet, the industrial dump, the animal graveyard, and just for good measure, the city's main drinking water source. Imagine a stew of rotting vegetables, chemical runoff, dead dogs, human waste, and expired fish flowing right past Westminster. Now pour a cup and say, cheers. Don't worry, the water company says it's filtered. That means it's passed through a mesh of gravel, wishful thinking, and possibly someone's old boot. If you live in a working-class neighborhood, your tap might come from a public pump down the street, which you share with 200 neighbors and 3 nearby factories. And the worst part, you might not even know it's deadly until it's too late. Cholera loves bad water. So does typhoid. They swim freely through the pipes like microscopic sharks. Whole families are taken out within days. A shared bucket, a misused chamber pot, a splash from the wrong pump, and your headline material. If you're lucky. Bathing? Now that's adorable. Most people don't have bathtubs. If you're middle class, you might share one with the family once a week. If you're poor, it's a tin tub in the kitchen once a month, if that. And that same water might double as laundry rinse, dishwater, or a place to soak your aching feet. Hygiene is creative. The government starts installing sewers eventually, thanks to the Great Stink of 1858, when the smell from the Thames was so horrific that Parliament fled the building. It took stench to make change. Until then, you boil your water when you can, or drink beer, the safe Victorian beverage for children and adults alike. Weak, warm, and slightly fizzy with salvation. So yes, in Victorian London, you can die from a glass of water. The trick isn't just avoiding thirst. It's avoiding where the thirst takes you. You've tried honest work. It's long, filthy, and barely pays enough to buy yesterday's bread. The water might kill you. The factory definitely will. And the rent collector doesn't take IOS. So what's left? Crime. And in Victorian London, it's not just an act, it's a career path. Start small. Maybe you're a pickpocket or a dipper, as the slang goes. You blend into crowds near the markets, bump someone gently, and vanish with a pocket watch or coin purse. Charles Dickens made Oliver Twist famous, but the real-life versions didn't get musical numbers. They got sent to Newgate Prison or shipped off to Australia. If you're a woman, you might become a fence, buying and reselling stolen goods in back alleys under layers of shawls and misdirection. Or maybe you run a twilight house where pickpockets drop their loot before the bobbies come sniffing. Feeling bold? Become a coster swindler selling bruised fruit or watered-down milk from a rickety cart, disappearing before complaints catch up. Or try your hand at forgery, card tricks, or the always popular three-card Monty, a fast-talking scam with a faster getaway. And if you've really got guts, there's always burglary. Break into a warehouse, a merchant's shop, or, if you're desperate, a church. You might find something valuable. You might also find a constable with a billy club and no bedtime. The police force exists, but they're underpaid, undermanned, and often 2 steps behind. Plus, you can bribe the right officer if you know the system. And let's face it, you probably do. Crime syndicates in London were shockingly organized. Some had territories, code words, and full recruitment pipelines. Then there's the resurrection men body snatchers who dig up fresh graves to sell corpses to medical schools. It's gruesome. It's illegal. It pays better than sewing buttons. Of course, the consequences are real. Get caught and you could be flogged, branded, jailed, or worse, transported to a penal colony. But if the alternative is starving on a cold street ... risk has a certain appeal. Let's say you've caught something. A cough, a fever, maybe your leg's been run over by a delivery cart. Time to see a doctor. Good luck. Because in Victorian London, medicine is less healing science and more creative improvisation with sharp metal. Doctors are out there, sure. Some even wear coats. But unless you're wealthy, your first stop isn't a physician, it's a chemist, where the cure for every ailment is a small bottle of laudanum, opium in liquid form, ideal for anything from a sore throat to existential dread. It won't cure you, but you'll stop caring. Can't afford a chemist? Maybe there's a barber surgeon down the road. Yes, a man who cuts hair and also amputates legs. If your wound is infected, he'll saw it off. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a stick to bite and a bucket to scream into. Don't even think about hospitals. They're overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and smell like old bandages and lost hope. The instruments aren't sterilized. Surgeons wipe their hands on aprons between patients. Germ theory exists, But many still think disease is caused by bad air and moral failure. If you survive the treatment, infection may finish the job. A splinter can become a death sentence. A toothache, 2 days from sepsis. And childbirth well. Women go in with pain and come out with a baby. Or a gravestone. Sometimes both. You don't go to the doctor to get better. You go because you've run out of other options. And sometimes, just sometimes, you come back out alive. The sun sets. The gas lamps flicker to life. And the fog thickens like a shroud. You might think the city calms down at night, but this is Victorian London. When the light fades, the real dangers come out. You never really stop. The smog irritates your throat, clings to your skin, and makes your eyelashes feel sticky. Everyone coughs. It's part of the daily soundtrack, along with the church bells, the clip-clop of hooves, and someone yelling about turnips. You wipe the windows. The cloth comes away black. You wash your hands. The water turns gray. Your clothes, no matter how often they're scrubbed, always smell faintly of smoke and despair. Even your curtains are stained with soot. They hang heavy and stiff like they've seen too much. You think about opening the window, and you remember what's outside. More smoke, more filth, and the smell of 12 chimney fires fighting for dominance. The worst of it, this is normal Londoners live in a permanent twilight. The sun is a rumor. People squint to read, children grow pale, plants on windowsills die of asphyxiation. And don't even think about drying laundry outside unless you enjoy wearing soot-stained shirts with a hint of arsenic during the infamous Great Smogs. The air becomes so dense that you can't see your own feet. People get lost. Walking home, omnibuses crash, boats collide on the Tong in 1873. One fog lasted for 5 straight days and left over 270 people dead. The city barely noticed. The poor, of course, it worse. Their fires burn cheap, dirty coal. Their walls are thin. Their lungs weaker. Children wheeze through winter like old dogs. If you reach adulthood without bronchitis consumption or mysterious blackened phlegm, you're a miracle. And yet you go on. You light the stove, you step outside. You pretend not to taste the air, because in Victorian London, the smog never ends. It just waits for you. You never really stop. The smog irritates your throat, clings to your skin, and makes your eyelashes feel sticky. Everyone coughs. It's part of the daily soundtrack, along with the church bells, the clip-clop of hooves, and someone yelling about turnips. You wipe the windows. The cloth comes away black. You wash your hands. The water turns gray. Your clothes, no matter how often they're scrubbed, always smell faintly of smoke and despair. Even your curtains are stained with soot. They hang heavy and stiff like they've seen too much. You think about opening the window, then you remember what's outside. More smoke, more filth, and the smell of 12 chimney fires fighting for dominance. The worst of it, this is normal Londoners live in a permanent twilight. The sun is a rumor. People squint to read, children grow pale, plants on windowsills die of asphyxiation. And don't even think about drying laundry outside unless you enjoy wearing soot-stained shirts with a hint of arsenic during the infamous Great Smogs. The air becomes so dense that you can't see your own feet. People get lost. Walking home, omnibuses crash, boats collide on the Tong in 1873. One fog lasted for 5 straight days and left over 270 people dead. The city barely noticed. The poor, of course, it worse. Their fires burn cheap, dirty coal. Their walls are thin. Their lungs weaker. Children wheeze through winter like old dogs. If you reach adulthood without bronchitis consumption or mysterious blackened phlegm, you're a miracle. And yet you go on. You light the stove, you step outside. You pretend not to taste the air, because in Victorian London, the smog never ends. It just waits for you. You'd be forgiven for thinking Victorian London was all soot, sickness, and screaming, and mostly you'd be right. But even in the dirtiest corners, under the weight of poverty and fog, something human still flickers. Because kindness, oddly enough, survives here too, though you often have to squint to see it. You might spot it in the shared loaf of bread, passed quietly between neighbors when one family runs out before payday, or in the woman who gives her last halfpenny to a barefoot child with bloodied feet. There's no reward, just a nod, and maybe a smile rare and precious, even in the darkest places, the tenements. The alleys, the workhouses, people look out for each other, not always not perfectly, but often enough to prove that the city hasn't broken them completely. A mother shares her hot brick on a freezing night. A chimney sweep helps a new boy not get stuck on his first climb. A dying man gives his boots to someone who still has the strength to work. These aren't grand gestures. They're small, quiet, but they matter more than gold in a place where hope is a rationed luxury. The pubs help too. They're loud, smelly, overcrowded, and absolutely essential. It's where people gather to sing, to joke, to drink away their bruises and their sorrow. You might not afford meat, but you can share a laugh over watery ale. Even the street performers, the penny dreadful sellers, the blind fiddler at the corner, they all form a kind of patchwork comfort. Reminders that not everything in the city is out to hurt you. Kindness here isn't naive. It's practical. It's born of shared suffering. Because when the system forgets you, when the rich pretend you don't exist, your only safety net is each other. And so, despite everything, the filth, the fever, the fog, people still love, still marry, still raise children, still hope. Because if you can find kindness in the gutter, a warm hand in the cold, a crust of bread, a half-HMED lullaby, then maybe the city hasn't won, not yet. So after 14 chapters of choking smog rats in the walls, toxic water, and toothless chemists prescribing opium for a broken leg, ask yourself honestly, would you survive Victorian London? Probably not. Let's be clear, this wasn't a city built for comfort. It was built on coal sweat and the crushed spines of the working poor. Every day was a battle against hunger, against disease, against landlords, factory foreman, constables, and the constant creeping sense that the world had forgotten. You modern luxury, soap, antibiotics, light switches didn't exist. There were no social safety nets, no universal health care, no days off. Just another fog-choked morning where your goal was simple: don't die before supper. You'd miss things like toilets, toothpaste, tap water. It doesn't try to kill you. You'd wonder why everyone stares at you for brushing your teeth or asking about vegetables. You'd miss showers. Oh, you'd miss showers. So much, and yet people did survive. Somehow they endured. Not because they had no other choice. They formed unions, they raised families, they organized strikes, wrote novels, played music on street corners, and clung to hope like it was the last piece of bread in the pantry. They laughed. Yes, even in the fog, they found love in crowded slums, sang lullabies over screaming children, and danced in pubs after 16-hour shifts. They weren't just victims. They were tough, resilient, and painfully human. You probably wouldn't last a day, and that's not an insult. It's a reminder that people who did, they carried the weight of an empire on their backs, often barefoot, often hungry, and almost always ignored. They built the world we now complain about in heated rooms with clean drinking water. So maybe it's okay that we wouldn't make it, but let's at least remember them not as soup-covered statistics, but as people who survive the impossible every single day. So after 14 chapters of choking smog rats in the walls, toxic water, and toothless chemists prescribing opium for a broken leg, ask yourself honestly, would you survive Victorian London? Probably not. Let's be clear, this wasn't a city built for comfort. It was built on coal sweat and the crushed spines of the working poor. Every day was a battle against hunger, against disease, against landlords, factory foreman, constables, and the constant creeping sense that the world had forgotten. You modern luxury, soap, antibiotics, light switches didn't exist. There were no social safety nets, no universal health care, no days off. Just another fog-choked morning where your goal was simple: don't die before supper. You'd miss things like toilets, toothpaste, tap water. It doesn't try to kill you. You'd wonder why everyone stares at you for brushing your teeth or asking about vegetables. You'd miss showers. Oh, you'd miss showers. So much, and yet people did survive. Somehow they endured. not because they had no other choice. They formed unions, they raised families, they organized strikes, wrote novels, played music on street corners, and clung to hope like it was the last piece of bread in the pantry. They laughed. Yes, even in the fog, they found love in crowded slums, sang lullabies over screaming children, and danced in pubs after 16-hour shifts. They weren't just victims. They were tough, resilient, and painfully human. You probably wouldn't last a day, and that's not an insult. It's a reminder that people who did, they carried the weight of an empire on their backs, often barefoot, often hungry, and almost always ignored. They built the world we now complain about in heated rooms with clean drinking water. So maybe it's okay that we wouldn't make it, but let's at least remember them not as soup-covered statistics, but as people who survived the impossible every single day. Gorgo was born into a city that didn't just break the rules, it redefined them. Sparta, unlike the rest of Greece, wasn't known for golden temples or philosophical debates. It was known for warriors. And Gorgo, she was born right at the top of that brutal food chain, the daughter of King Cleons, one of the two ruling kings of Sparta, from the moment she took her first breath. Gorgo's life was already political. She wasn't some ornament to be married off for alliances in. Sparta women could own land, speak in public, and be educated, a fact that shocked other Greeks. And Gorgo wasn't just any Spartan woman as the king's only child. She was expected to observe, learn, and one day wield influence in a world dominated by hoplite shields and sharp spears. As a young girl, she likely witnessed royal councils. Matters of war and diplomacy were debated with blunt urgency, and she paid attention. Her father, Clemens, wasn't the most stable ruler, in fact. Some thought he was completely mad by the end. But he left Gorgo with an early understanding of how dangerous politics could be, and how sharp the knife edge of power truly was. There's a famous story. When she was only about 8 or 9 years old, a foreign ambassador tried to bribe her father to support the Persian Empire. While the adults whispered, young Gorgo stepped forward and boldly warned her father. "Father, you had better leave or this stranger will corrupt you." That wasn't just precocious. It was fearless. Her father listened, and the man was thrown out of Sparta. The lesson: Gorgo had teeth, and people learned early not to underestimate them. So before she was even of marriageable age, Gorgo was already showing signs of political brilliance and steelage judgment. She wasn't just royalty by blood, she was royalty by behavior. And in a society that admired discipline, clarity, and brutal honesty, Gorgo thrived. Her destiny was already in motion, not as a passive queen in a gilded palace, but as a Spartan lioness ready to guard her people, and if needed, speak louder than the kings themselves. Gorgo was born into a city that didn't just break the rules, it redefined them. Sparta, unlike the rest of Greece, wasn't known for golden temples or philosophical debates. It was known for warriors. And Gorgo, she was born right at the top of that brutal food chain, the daughter of King Cleons, one of the two ruling kings of Sparta, from the moment she took her first breath. Gorgo's life was already political. She wasn't some ornament to be married off for alliances in. Sparta women could own land, speak in public, and be educated, a fact that shocked other Greeks. And Gorgo wasn't just any Spartan woman as the king's only child. She was expected to observe, learn, and one day wield influence in a world dominated by hoplite shields and sharp spears. As a young girl, she likely witnessed royal councils. Matters of war and diplomacy were debated with blunt urgency, and she paid attention. Her father, Clemens, wasn't the most stable ruler, in fact. Some thought he was completely mad by the end. But he left Gorgo with an early understanding of how dangerous politics could be, and how sharp the knife edge of power truly was. There's a famous story. When she was only about 8 or 9 years old, a foreign ambassador tried to bribe her father to support the Persian Empire. While the adults whispered, young Gorgo stepped forward and boldly warned her father. "Father, you had better leave or this stranger will corrupt you." That wasn't just precocious. It was fearless. Her father listened, and the man was thrown out of Sparta. The lesson: Gorgo had teeth, and people learned early not to underestimate them. So before she was even of marriageable age, Gorgo was already showing signs of political brilliance and steelage judgment. She wasn't just royalty by blood, she was royalty by behavior. And in a society that admired disciplined clarity and brutal honesty, Gorgo thrived. Her destiny was already in motion, not as a passive queen in a gilded palace, but as a Spartan lioness ready to guard her people, and if needed speak louder than the kings themselves. Gorgo's marriage to King Leonidas was not a tale of courtly romance or opulent weddings. This was Sparta, where practicality reigned and weakness was despised. Here is your compiled and smooth script with the exact first and last paragraphs preserved, divided naturally into 4 segments. The calm, soothing, sleep-inducing tone has been maintained, and the structure flows continuously as a single uninterrupted piece. But Gorgo was not looking for poetry. She was looking for power and a partner. As tensions with Xerxes grew, Leonidas prepared to march north with his small army of 300 Spartans. Not Gorgo. In fact, her influence only grew stronger. She had become more than just a widow. She was now the living symbol of Spartan resilience. While Athenian women were confined to the home, barred from politics, and barely educated, Spartan women were trained to be physically strong, mentally sharp, and socially assertive. Her voice carried weight precisely because she used it sparingly and always with precision. Athens wanted to fight on sea, Sparta on land. Unity was fragile. It was likely during this critical period that Gorgo became something of an unofficial advisor to the Spartan Gerousia, the Council of Elders. She understood both Persian cunning and Greek pride, and more importantly, she understood how to balance Spartan honor with practical survival. Sparta could not afford to be reckless, nor could it afford to look weak. Gorgo had seen what unchecked ambition did to her father Cleomenes, and she had learned how to walk the tightrope of power. She would have been present as Sparta debated its next steps, whether to march north again, whether to commit troops to the naval battle of Salamis, or whether to defend the Peloponnesus and let the rest of Greece fend for itself. These were not easy decisions, and they were being made by men who had just lost their king in a blaze of glory. Gorgo's presence, rational, emotionally controlled, and deeply patriotic, may have been the anchor Sparta needed. There is no record of her giving orders, but there didn't need to be. Spartan queens led through example, not decree. Her mere survival, her unshaken presence, was itself a kind of leadership. In a city obsessed with honor, Gorgo had already proven that she could carry the shield. She wasn't a ruler in name, but a force in reality. While Sparta remained a dual monarchy led by men, Gorgo's presence ensured there was always a keen-eyed strategist watching from behind the throne. In many ways, she was the unspoken lore of Sparta, upholding its ideals, pushing its leaders, and sharpening its spine. Gorgo didn't just redefine what it meant to be a queen. She redefined what it meant to be a Spartan. The death of Leonidas at Thermopylae was a seismic moment, not just emotionally, but politically. He had become a martyr for all of Greece, a symbol of resistance against Persian tyranny. But Sparta could not afford to weep for long. War was still raging, and the decisions made in the months that followed would determine the fate of the entire Greek world. And while Gorgo held no official rank, her influence didn't vanish with her husband's body. With her son Clearchus still a minor, a regency had to be established. While historical records don't list Gorgo as a formal regent, we can be sure she had a role in guiding his education and shaping the political decisions made in his name. This wasn't a time for grieving mothers. This was a time for cold calculation. This wasn't just cultural flair, it was survival strategy. Spartans believed that strong women produced strong sons. So girls ran, wrestled, and trained alongside boys in their youth. They were expected to be healthy, confident, and unafraid to speak blunt truths. But Gorgo wasn't just one of many tough Spartan women. She was the finest example of what Spartan womanhood could be. She was known not just for her wisdom, but for her razor-sharp wit. There's a famous anecdote where a foreign woman asked her, "Why are you Spartan women the only ones who rule your men?" Gorgo didn't hesitate. She shot back, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." That line wasn't just clever, it was pure Sparta. It signaled a culture where female strength was seen as essential, not ornamental. In Gorgo's world, motherhood wasn't a passive role. It was a political one. To raise a Spartan son was to train a future warrior. And for Gorgo, raising her own son, Clearchus, who would become king after Leonidas, was an act of devotion, not just to family, but to the entire Spartan state. She likely oversaw his early education, surrounded him with the values of honor, sacrifice, and discipline, and instilled in him a love not for glory, but for duty. And while statues were built for the fallen, Gorgo became a living reminder of why they fought in the first place. With Leonidas gone, Sparta was vulnerable, not just militarily, but politically. The war with Persia still raged, alliances were fragile, and tensions ran high across the Greek world. In this chaos, Gorgo acted as both guardian and strategist. Though we don't have detailed records of her day-to-day political maneuvers, several ancient sources including Herodotus make it clear. When matters of diplomacy or internal threat arose, Gorgo was consulted. She wasn't just included, she was trusted. One story tells of a hidden message sent to the Spartans on a wooden tablet. The text had been scraped away and replaced with wax to disguise its contents, a warning about Persia's coming invasion. The men of the Spartan court were baffled, but Gorgo, calmly assessing the strange tablet, instructed them to scrape off the wax. Beneath it, the original message revealed the dire news. Gorgo had solved a diplomatic riddle that could have cost Sparta everything. Before he left, Gorgo, now a seasoned political mind, wasn't overcome with tears or begging. She understood the fragile web of alliances that held the Greek city-states together, and the threat that Persian gold posed to it. While Athens and other cities were notoriously vulnerable to bribes, Gorgo's sharp warning from childhood still applied. Beware of gifts that reek of corruption. She encouraged a stance of uncompromising honor, even when it was politically risky. And the Spartans listened. Because when Gorgo spoke, it wasn't he with the softness expected of women in most of the ancient world. It was with the precision of a soldier and the clarity of a strategist. She knew what was at stake, not just Sparta's land, but its very soul. Even in grief, Gorgo remained unshaken. The shield Leonidas carried into battle may have been lost, but Gorgo became something greater, the mind that would carry Sparta through its darkest days. To understand Gorgo's significance, you have to understand what it meant to be a woman in Sparta and how Gorgo took that already rare privilege and amplified it into something nearly legendary. Instead, she offered him just 6 chilling words. Come back with your shield or on it. That wasn't just a farewell. That was an order. It was the ultimate Spartan command, reminding her husband that death in honor was preferable to life in shame. If he couldn't win, he was to die standing. And Leonidas did. At Thermopylae, he and his 300 fell to the last man, buying precious time for Greece to rally. His death would echo through history, but Gorgo's words would echo louder. She didn't just send her husband off to die. She helped forge the myth of Thermopylae itself. While Leonidas died a hero, Gorgo lived to protect the legacy and perhaps to shape the empire his sacrifice tried to save. By marrying Leonidas, she became queen, but unlike queens elsewhere in Greece, Gorgo didn't fade into the background. There were no secluded women's quarters for her, no endless weaving by candlelight. Spartan queens were expected to speak, to advise, to stand beside their kings as intellectual equals, and Leonidas knew exactly who he had married. Gorgo was clever, fiercely loyal to Sparta, and utterly unafraid to speak her mind, even to him. Their partnership was built on mutual respect. In the famously terse style of their people, they likely spoke few words, but every word counted. Gorgo, raised in the fire of politics since childhood, likely advised Leonidas on diplomatic tensions, Persian threats, and internal Spartan rivalries. While other Greek women were hidden from public life, Gorgo helped shape Spartan policy from within the palace walls and beyond. Leonidas wasn't just any Spartan man, he was a warrior through and through, known more for his silence and scars than for charm or poetry. One of her most legendary moments came during the build-up to the Persian invasion. After Leonidas' death at Thermopylae, many queens would have slipped quietly into mourning, perhaps disappearing from the public eye. Her insight likely saved thousands of lives. But Gorgo's genius wasn't just in puzzles. Spartan women were unlike any other in the ancient world. Yet Gorgo never flaunted her power. She didn't need to. The Persian threat was still looming, and Greece was deeply divided. As the war against Persia raged in the years past, Gorgo's role subtly shifted from queen consort to queen mother, from political influencer to guardian of legacy. Yet she was never a relic of a past era. In an age when the achievements of women were easily erased, Gorgo's intellect, sharp tongue, and political bravery left a mark too deep to wash away. She didn't inherit greatness. She carved her own version of it. And Sparta, brutal and uncompromising as it was, loved her for it. Sparta prized few things: silence, strength, and discipline. But Gorgo managed to make her voice one of its sharpest weapons. Unlike other Greek poleis that evolved into cultural centers, Sparta refused to compromise its militaristic identity. It remained rigid, proud, and dangerously insular. While Athens adapted and innovated, Sparta remained unmoved. The same military codes that once made Sparta invincible also made it inflexible. But Gorgo, ever pragmatic, likely accepted this reality with the same steely clarity she had shown all her life. She wasn't a footnote in their stories. She was a chapter all her own. Historians and scholars still marvel at how frequently her name appears in the writings of Herodotus, not as a passive royal, but as a decisive figure. In a world that almost never recorded the names of women, Gorgo cut through the silence like a spear through a shield. What makes her legacy even more profound is that she never held official power. She didn't command armies or sit on the throne. She advised, she warned, she solved, she raised a king. And through it all, she embodied the terrifying dignity of Sparta itself, a city that chose death over disgrace, silence over boasting, and action over rhetoric. Her most quoted words, "Come back with your shield or on it," are more than a farewell. They are a philosophy, a distilled version of the Spartan code. And though they've been repeated, repainted, and even repurposed in modern times, they still carry the cold fire of their original context. A queen sending her husband to his death, not with tears, but with a command to uphold honor. Today, Gorgo stands among the rare few ancient women who are remembered not because they were tragic, beautiful, or scandalous, but because they were respected. She shattered expectations in a society already notorious for doing the same. Her intellect was so pronounced, her voice so respected, that she became woven into the fabric of Sparta's identity. She may have lived over 2,000 years ago. She had lived through more than one kind of war, not just the ones with spears and arrows, but wars of diplomacy, of shifting alliances, of internal unrest. By now, Gorgo had likely become a living relic in the best sense of the word. A link to Leonidas, a symbol of what Sparta once was, and a reminder of what it might become again if it stayed true to its core without losing its mind to arrogance. No record survives describing her final days, but there's no reason to believe she met them with anything less than calm resolve. And Gorgo, still standing tall amidst its stone and bronze, witnessed the long consequences of Leonidas' sacrifice, not only for Sparta, but for Greece itself. The Persians were eventually repelled, yes, but victory came at a price. Sparta emerged from the Persian Wars with immense prestige, hailed as the protector of Greek freedom. But with honor came rivalry. Athens, fueled by democracy and ambition, grew in wealth and influence, slowly drifting from ally to adversary. Tensions simmered, and a new storm was brewing, the Peloponnesian War. It was a conflict that would define the next generation of Spartans, including Gorgo's own son. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words were remembered for centuries. She was living proof that in a culture where words were precious, the right ones could echo louder than shields clashing in battle. She had ruled without ruling, fought without a sword, and shaped a city that didn't even allow its kings to indulge in softness. If Gorgo mourned, she did so privately. If she hoped for the future, she kept it to herself. Because in Sparta, emotions were not for display, legacy was. And hers was already secured in bronze and blood. Gorgo of Sparta didn't need marble statues or epic poems to be remembered. Her legacy was etched in something far stronger, the collective memory of a city built on discipline, honor, and defiance. Unlike other queens whose stories were wrapped in tragedy or romance, Gorgo's tale is one of sharp intellect, political savvy, and enduring pride. Gorgo remained a living embodiment of Spartan ideals, a presence so formidable that even without a crown or battlefield, she still commanded attention. She used the truth, delivered like a knife to the heart of pretense. One of her most quoted responses came when a foreign woman asked, "Why are Spartan women the only ones who rule their men?" Gorgo's reply was legendary, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." The line wasn't just a jab, it was a manifesto. In 6 words, she summarized the entire Spartan worldview and female empowerment, the way only a Spartan could, with blunt, blistering pride. She used language like a general uses tactics. When she exposed the bribe attempt to her father as a child, she didn't stammer or plead, she issued a warning. When Persian messages came hidden in wax, she offered the solution without hesitation. Gorgo didn't just speak, she strategized through words. And Sparta listened. Her son Clearchus eventually took the throne, but he was not the kind of king his father had been. Her statements had the rhythm of command and the clarity of someone who understood power, not as ornamentation, but as responsibility. She didn't need to scream to be heard. She made every word a dagger. And what made her words so devastating was that they were always anchored in truth. She didn't bluff. She didn't flatter. Gorgo knew exactly what was expected of her, as a queen, as a Spartan, as a woman who had seen kings fall and wars ignite. She met those expectations head-on, not with emotional outbursts, but with calculated, unforgettable replies. Her voice was her weapon. Her intellect was her armor. And while many queens are remembered for their tears or their beauty, Gorgo was remembered for what she said and for never saying anything she didn't mean. In Sparta, that was the highest form of respect anyone could earn. Quiet, less known, and largely absent from military glory, Clearchus ruled in the long shadow cast by Leonidas. And behind him, still watching, was Gorgo, the woman who had raised him, shaped him, and ensured he understood what it meant to carry the blood of a hero. And now, without Leonidas, she carried the memory of his sacrifice into every political decision that followed. And the rare fact that she appears by name in multiple ancient sources, something extremely uncommon for women in classical history. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, mentions her more than once, praising her intelligence and recounting her ability to solve riddles and navigate political threats. In a world where women were often nameless shadows, Gorgo stood out not as a myth or a lover or a tragic figure, but as a mind to be reckoned with. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of what Sparta wanted to believe about itself, a society where even women were strong, wise, and ready to defend their homeland at any cost. Gorgo didn't need to fight with a spear. She fought with words, with counsel, with unwavering resolve. Her contributions weren't made on dusty battlefields, but in war councils and private conversations, in raising a king and keeping a nation emotionally intact during its darkest hours. But what made Gorgo exceptional wasn't just her connection to two kings. It was her mind, her reputation. Even centuries later, her name remains one of the few ancient Spartan women preserved by history, not because she was a queen, but because she was impossible to forget. Gorgo was a master of Spartan, with a form of verbal warfare all its own. She didn't use metaphors or flowery speeches. In a male-dominated society built around the sword, Gorgo showed that intellect could be a battlefield too. Gorgo's later years were spent in a city that never softened. If Gorgo saw the writing on the wall, she likely recognized that Sparta's strict ideals, once its greatest strength, were now becoming limitations. She had already done more than most women and most men of her time. She stood at the intersection of two of Sparta's greatest icons, daughter of King Cleomenes, wife of King Leonidas, and yet she was never overshadowed by either. But Gorgo remains a figure of relevance for every woman underestimated, for every strategist who works behind the scenes, for every voice that refuses to whisper. She is a timeless reminder. Strength isn't always loud, and power doesn't always wear a crown. And silence reigns over the sands, stand the remains of a forgotten royal ambition, the desert castles. These haunting structures, scattered across the desolate landscape, seem almost like hallucinations. Grand facades rise out of emptiness, complete with domed roofs, decorated arches, and faint traces of long-faded frescoes. Yet despite their utility, the architecture and decoration suggest something deeper. But even in decay, they tell a story of a time when the desert was not a place to escape, but a place to transform. In these silent stones, the Umayyads left behind more than architecture. They left echoes of empire, ambition, and oasis-born luxury. These were places of beauty and leisure. The walls once shimmered with frescoes depicting animals, musicians, and even Byzantine-style nudes, a surprising sight in early Islamic art. Rising from the sands of Arabia to rule an empire that stretched from Spain to Central Asia, their capital in Damascus pulsed with political power. Located deep in the Jordanian wilderness, it appears modest from the outside, a squat stone structure half buried in the vast stillness. It functioned as a pleasure palace and bathhouse, part spa, part political retreat, part cultural statement. Inside, it features a domed audience hall, a series of bathing rooms, and a vaulted ceiling painted with the constellations, an Umayyad observatory hidden in the desert. The Umayyads weren't building only mosques, they were building secular spaces where art, science, and power intertwined. Today, Qasr Amra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a rare glimpse into the intimate, hedonistic, and politically charged world of the early Umayyad elite. From afar, it resembles a military stronghold, thick walls, narrow slits, and an intimidating symmetry. Most scholars believe it served as a caravanserai, a roadside inn for merchants, travelers, and diplomats. With over 60 rooms arranged around a central courtyard, it could easily accommodate guests, their attendants, and their animals. Some believe it may also have served as a tribal meeting place, a site where Umayyad officials could extend influence over Bedouin leaders far from the capital. But appearances deceive. Qaza al-Karana is not a fortress, at least not in the traditional sense. Vaulted ceilings, decorative niches, and remnants of carved plaster suggest spaces meant to impress. Upstairs rooms may have hosted private negotiations, secluded enough for diplomacy, grand enough to awe. Even the graffiti left by later visitors adds to the sense of layered time, of a building that has witnessed centuries of desert passage. There are no battlements, no nearby water source, no garrison presence. The slits likely admitted light rather than defended against arrows. In the heart of an empty plain, the castle still whispers of courtly songs, hot baths, and painted stars. It is not just a building. It is a desert dream, defying the march of centuries. These castles were statements complex, layered, and unapologetically grand. But it's the frescoes that make Amra extraordinary. Let's step inside, and a different world unfolds. The walls are alive with imagery. There are dancing women, wine-drinking nobles, musicians strumming lutes, and figures from Greek mythology like Hercules. One ceiling maps the zodiac, while another wall boasts the fresco of the six kings. It's a bold declaration of power, of pleasure, of cultural dominance. Colors that defy the desolate exterior, frescoes that whisper secrets from over 1,000 years ago. Yet the Umayyads remain deeply rooted in their tribal nomadic origins. The desert wasn't something to be avoided. It was their origin story, the crucible that shaped their ancestors. There were stargazing chambers, elaborate bathhouses, and audience halls with intricate carvings. The Umayyads were consolidating power in a rapidly expanding empire. They needed to display authority, but also legitimacy. What better way to impress local tribes and foreign envoys than with palatial retreats in the middle of nowhere built with cosmopolitan flair and imperial elegance? At Amra, frescoes depict bathing scenes, musicians, and even a famous painting of the six kings in image, showing rulers from Byzantium, Persia, and Ethiopia paying tribute to the Umayyads. It was visual propaganda, etched in plaster, reinforcing the idea that the desert too bowed to Umayyad power. These desert estates served as venues for diplomacy, hunting expeditions, and elite gatherings, far from the watchful eyes and intrigue of the capital. They are beautiful, mysterious, and isolated, and they've puzzled historians for centuries. The Umayyads had inherited the visual vocabulary of the lands they conquered, and they wove it together with skill. Some castles featured mosaics of grapevines, fountains framed with Corinthian columns, and frescoes alive with mythical beasts. This eclectic blend sent a clear message. The Umayyads were not mere desert rulers. They were heirs to a broader, multi-civilizational legacy. In the heart of Jordan's sun-bleached deserts, where the horizon seems to melt into the sky, they weren't fortresses in the traditional sense. Instead, they served as luxurious retreat seasonal residences, pleasure palaces, and hunting lodges for the Umayyad elite. Kings, princes, and high-ranking officials used these spaces as getaways from the politics of Damascus, the capital of the Islamic world at the time. And rather than hide from the harshness of the desert, they embraced it. Built during the Umayyad Caliphate in the 7th and 8th centuries, these castles weren't constructed to repel armies or defend trade routes. The Umayyads were asserting control not just over land, but over nature itself. By erecting these palaces in the desert, they were sending a message. Even in the harshest conditions, their power, culture, and sophistication would flourish. These buildings became monuments to Umayyad authority, artistry, and confidence. But why build such lavish structures in such remote and unforgiving places? Part of the answer lies in the symbolism. There was also a practical layer. Many of the desert castles were built near seasonal water sources or ancient trade routes, allowing them to serve as way stations or administrative hubs. Today, many of the desert castles lie in ruins, partially buried by the sand they once defied. To understand the desert castles of Jordan, one must step into the mindset of the Umayyads, the first great Islamic dynasty. So instead of leaving the wilderness behind, they brought civilization into it. And these weren't crude outposts. They were architectural marvels, often blending Roman, Byzantine, and Persian influences. In places like Qasr al-Mshada, you can still see intricate stonework adorning the outer walls, floral and geometric designs that suggest a fusion of Islamic restraint and Greco-Roman exuberance. None of the desert castles captivates the imagination quite like Amra. Built in the early 8th century, Amra is believed to have been commissioned by Caliph al-Walid I, or one of his princes. covering nearly every surface. The paintings depict a world far removed from conventional assumptions about early Islamic art. Such figural art has sparked debates, as Islamic art is often associated with anachronism. But Quasar Amra shows that the early Islamic world was far more nuanced. Time has taken its toll. Many frescoes have faded, their pigments dimmed by wind and sun. But restoration efforts have preserved their haunting beauty. Then there is Qasr al-Qurana, rising like a mirage east of Amman. A massive limestone rectangle, precise and imposing. Its real purpose remains debated. Inside, this structure reveals quiet sophistication. Suggest literate guests from diverse regions, offering delicate clues to its wide and purposeful usage. Qasr al-Harana feels like a riddle. Its walls whisper questions rather than offer answers. Built to resemble a fortress, yet functioning more like a salon, its very ambiguity seems by design. In an age of expanding borders and political unease, appearances held undeniable power. The structure projected strength, hinted at hospitality, and silently proclaimed stability all at once. Foundations still form the bones of a magnificent courtyard. You can trace with your eyes the outlines of rooms meant to impress dignitaries and tribal leaders. Most scholars agree that Qasr al-Mashata was designed as a winter palace, its size and elegance suggesting a retreat not of solitude, but of statement. They were sanctuaries for ritual, relaxation, diplomacy, and even cosmic reflection. Behind its quietly fading frescoes lies a full Roman-style bathing system. The Apoditerium, Tepidarium, Caldarium, and a complex furnace system below to heat it all. Within the warm steam and soft echoes of these bathhouses, leaders could host tribal elders, settle disputes, and form secret alliances. One dome traces constellations in such detail, it becomes clear bathing. Here was meant to elevate the soul as much as cleanse the skin. The luxury wasn't just indulgence, it was symbolic. The Umayyads were showcasing refinement as a pillar of legitimate rule. Before the age of telescopes, smartphones, or satellite charts, the night sky was everything. A calendar, a compass, a mystery. The Umayyads, steeped in Greco-Roman knowledge and Persian cosmology, gazed upward not just with curiosity, but with reverence. Aligning human rule with the stars above sent a potent message. Our dominion below mirrors the heavens. In these remote retreats, far from the glow of city lights, the night sky would have been astonishing. A black velvet canvas scattered with countless pinpricks of starlight. The palace's domed chambers and open courtyards became perfect observatories, silent sanctuaries for contemplation of the cosmos. To raise a palace from the sand was to demonstrate dominion over the untamable. Meetings, negotiations, private discussions, all could unfold undisturbed. The desert provided not only solitude, but secrecy. It shielded the ambitions of empire beneath a canvas of sky and sand, where stars bore silent witness and wind carried no tailies. These architectural marvels were declarations of mastery over terrain, over nature, over perception itself. They sent a loud, quiet message: our power extends even into the silence of the earth. Here, where nothing thrives unaided, we flourish. And in the harsh vastness of the desert, a steaming bath was as grand a statement as a victorious march. Their quiet grandeur reveals that early Islam was not opposed to science. It was in fact a foundation for the golden age to come. Why, in such unforgiving and barren regions, would the Umayyads build structures so rich in detail, so laden with symbolism, so intertwined with power and leisure? These desert castles were not only homes for rulers or gatherings for diplomacy, they were sanctuaries where mind met cosmos, where the mysteries of the stars touched the earth in pigment and stone. It is a painted sky, a swirling tapestry of zodiac symbols and celestial figures, forming a bridge between science and spirit. This was no mere decoration. It reflected a deep understanding of astronomy, likely passed down through scribes, scholars, and astronomers from the lands they absorbed into their empire. The vast landscape offered them what cities could not: space, silence, and connection to ancestral rhythms. Building in the desert allowed rulers and princes a sacred retreat from the relentless pulse of Damascus. Here, they could breathe, reflect, and reign. It was an embrace of both privacy and prestige. And adorning those walls, art that challenges our expectations. Frescoes of zodiac constellations, planetary symbols, celestial figures, and bathing scenes. Women playing music, mythical creatures, and even stars painted with astonishing precision, all blending into an experience that merged the sensual with the sacred. The technology was inherited from conquered lands, but the intent was unmistakably Umayyad. They weren't merely adopting the architecture, they were infusing it with their own philosophy. They were places where sand surrendered to steam and stars above were mirrored in pigment below. Even far from the capital, the Umayyads did not abandon elegance, they carried it with intention, as a defining feature of their reign. In a world where water was sacred, a functioning bathhouse became a rare and deliberate display of wealth, order, and control over nature. Scattered throughout the desert castles of Jordan, these thermal sanctuaries testify to how deeply the Umayyads valued comfort and civilization in the most challenging of landscapes. Within its incomplete bones, audience halls, private quarters, a mosque, and grand courtyards were once envisioned. Yet something halted the dream. Perhaps it was the death of Caliph al-Walid II, who is believed to have commissioned it. Others suspect engineering troubles or shifting political winds. Whatever the cause, construction stopped abruptly, its vision suspended mid-breath. Today, when visitors wander through its echoing corridors and gaze through narrow windows that frame an endless desert sky, they find themselves stepping into a ghostly theater of diplomacy. It is more than a ruined palace. It is a stone poem from an era when the Umayyads were more than warriors or governors. They were architects of a cultural tapestry, weaving vision into every brick. These rulers dared to dress the desert in elegance. Though silenced by time, the palace's carved stones continue to speak fluently the language of empire bold, intricate, and unwavering. What negotiations unfolded here? What quiet strategies played out in shadowed corners? Situated just south of Amman, this grand Umayyad palace was never fully completed, and yet its skeletal remains still hum with the echo of imperial dreams. Flourishing with interwoven geometric patterns, stylized animals, and blooming floral motifs, the wall speaks in the dialect of ancient empires, Byzantine, Sasanian, and Islamic traditions blending into a single bold voice. It was a visual proclamation of Umayyad identity, strong, cultivated, and embracing the grandeur of civilizations they had conquered or admired. Yet ironically, much of this facade now rests far from its desert birthplace. In the early 20th century, the Ottoman Sultan gifted a portion of it to the German Kaiser. Today, that fragment resides in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, a lonely piece of the desertous past, cradled in European marble halls. Among all the desert castles that dot this region, Qasr al-Mashhada stands out for its intricate artistry and architectural complexity. Its surviving southern facade, rich with history and intent, is regarded as one of the finest surviving examples of early Islamic stonework in the world. It is not a relic of war, but a sculpture of subtle influence, a chessboard carved in stone. In the emptiness of the Jordanian desert, Qasr al-Harana stands not as a monument to battles, but as a stage for politics and pageantry, where every echo hints at a whisper once full of purpose. Qasr al-Mashhada may lie in partial ruin today, but even in its fragmented state, it dazzles with the weight of ambition. What instantly strikes the eyes and imagination is the masterfully carved relief that once adorned this palace's walls. Still, even stripped of its outer skin, the palace's remains in Jordan continue to inspire awe. Even in stillness, Qasr al-Mashadar radiates legacy. It might feel paradoxical, at first elaborate bathhouses tucked within arid deserts. But for the Umayyads, hammams were not simply places to cleanse the body. Take Qasr Amra, for example. Bathing was more than a matter of hygiene. It was a deeply social ritual. Inside some of these hammams, particularly at Qasr Amra, ceilings resemble ancient observatories. These bathhouses, nestled in quiet corners of palatial ruins, gave more than warmth and water. They gave culture. Perhaps one of the most mesmerizing and often overlooked aspects of these desert palaces is how many of them were designed not only for comfort or governance, but for the stars. In Qasr Amra, the bathhouse dome is more than architectural. But beyond the intellectual, there was the mystical. Whether used for navigation, calendar making, or more esoteric meditations, the Umayyads made sure these structures could host such moments. And yet, one of the most enduring puzzles surrounding the desert castles is their profound isolation. The answer lies beyond simple practicality. The early Umayyads were still tribal at heart descendants of nomads who saw the desert not as emptiness, but as home. Yet there was more. The isolation wasn't just practical, it was performative. And strategically, the distance offered exclusivity. These were not places for the masses, but for the few. These castles were where sensitive negotiations could unfold, where tribal leaders could be wooed with gifts and luxury, far from the rumors and rivalries of urban politics. In the hush of the desert, diplomacy found a quieter, more intimate rhythm. The solitude wasn't merely peaceful, it was intentional. It offered the perfect space for indulgence and experimentation, whether that meant adopting foreign customs, contemplating celestial patterns, or appreciating figural art that might have been forbidden in stricter religious environments. These castles weren't just hideaways. They were creative and cultural laboratories for the ruling elite. Surprisingly, many of these remote palaces held more strategic value than their locations first suggest. Skilled conservationists had stabilized weakened structures, cleared debris, and carefully preserved artworks once thought lost to time. And yet, the desert remains an unrelenting adversary. Intense sunlight, wind-blown sand, and dry air continue to challenge even the most delicate efforts. These sites, never intended to survive over 1,000 years, let alone modern tourism and climate pressures, are fragile guardians of history. But they are no longer forgotten. They speak not with shouts, but with quiet insistence about a civilization that saw the desert not as a void, but as a stage. And against all odds, their story still travels across the sands, echoing gently into the modern world. But soon, they noticed something more complex and mysterious: the moon. Its glow changed night by night, swelling into fullness and then retreating into shadow. It guided when to hunt, when to gather, when to rest, when to prepare. But even beyond practicality, it held sacred meaning. Time was not abstract. It was spiritual. To observe it was to commune with nature, the gods, and each other. Some of these artifacts are over 30,000 years old. It changed every few days, offering a visible and consistent sign that time was moving forward. The Babylonians, Egyptians, Chinese, Maya, and Hebrews all used versions of moon-based timekeeping. The moon was often personified, given divine form as a god or goddess, a celestial being watching over the earth. Its phases aligned with festivals, rituals, and myths. Tracking its cycle was not simply about keeping time, it was about keeping faith, preserving tradition, and giving structure to life's mysteries. Some, like the Islamic calendar, remain strictly lunar to this day. Others blended the lunar and solar cycles, adding leap months or days to bring them into alignment. Yet in these ancient beginnings, it was always the moon that led the way. For early nomadic peoples, this was both practical and poetic. A complete moon cycle became a month, and 12 moons nearly matched a solar year, though not perfectly. This mismatch would challenge later civilizations. especially those relying on agriculture, but it laid the foundation for the first calendars. One of the most famous, the Shango bone from Central Africa, features a complex series of notches. Many scholars believe it functioned as a lunar calendar, possibly tracking fertility or hunting seasons, showing that even in prehistory, humans were marking time not just to survive, but to understand. Early humans carved notches into bones, painted marks on cave walls, and aligned stones to the sun's rise during solstices. The moon was our first guide through the darkness, and its rhythm remains etched into us. Even now, in a world of atomic clocks and digital calendars, its gentle glow still stirs something ancient within us. Memory of when time was told in light and shadow, and when the sky was the only calendar we ever needed. These weren't random acts. They were the first calendar's deeply symbolic efforts understand the world's heartbeat. This celestial dance was not just beautiful, it was regular. Antler bones with notched tallies may have tracked moon phases or menstrual cycles, both essential to survival and closely tied to life's rhythms. It was a living calendar in the sky. Its phases waxing, full, waning, and new offered one of the most obvious and mesmerizing patterns in the heavens. Long before cities or writing, people across continents were counting moons, not years or days, but moons. These phases became the first global clock, a shared rhythm understood by hunter-gatherers from Africa to Asia to the Americas. Without clocks, our ancestors lived by nature's cues. Time was the movement of light and shadow, the change in wind, the appearance of stars. It told you when to travel, when to plant, when to huddle close, and when to sing to the fire. Before time had numbers, it had meaning. Before it had names, it had stories shared by moonlight, marked in stone and passed from hand to hand across generations. Predictable, a pattern that could be trusted. The moon became the first timekeeper, its cycle dividing life into measured units we would eventually call months. In fact, the word month comes directly from moon. Some sat near seasonal trade routes, quietly observing the ebb and flow of commerce. Others guarded essential water sources, life-giving wells that determined survival. For modern visitors, the desert castles provoke questions as much as wonder. How did such beauty arise in such seclusion? What do they teach us about survival, about empire, about the human need for beauty amid desolation? As one walks through Khwarizm-Ra's painted chambers or gazes out through the narrow slits of Qasr al-Qurana, the sensation is not of decay, but of endurance. In the blank canvas of the desert, every carved arch, painted fresco, or tiled dome stood out like a gem. They challenge assumptions about Islamic art, about the simplicity of desert life, and about the supposed barriers between East and West. These spaces reveal a dynasty not only steeped in tradition, but hungry for exploration, innovation, and expression. This was the world of our Paleolithic ancestors, raw, undefined, and deeply connected to nature's pulse. And yet, even then, time moved. People noticed. Before calendars, timepieces, or even words to describe it, early humans marked the rhythm of existence by watching the world around them. The rise and fall of the sun, the phases of the moon, the migration of animals, the bloom and wither of plants' nature was their only clock, and it ticked with purpose. The barren surroundings didn't diminish their beauty, they magnified it. Amidst a sea of stone and sand, the castles rose as man-made oases, silent poems of elegance that defied the natural world around them. Their very remoteness became part of their magic. Each one whispered a quiet truth, that refinement, artistry, and regal presence could flourish even where nothing else dared to grow. Still more functioned as administrative checkpoints, keeping watch over Bedouin tribes, acting as rest stops for royal messengers, or offering safe havens for traveling caravans. But they endure quiet relics of an empire that dared to inscribe its grandeur into emptiness. And today, they serve a different purpose. They are windows into a vanished world, drawing in scholars, tourists, and dreamers who walk their sand-swept halls in search of forgotten stories. Modern Jordan has embraced these sites not only as historical treasures, but as symbols of cultural resilience. Castles like Qasr Amra, Qasr al-Qurana, and Qasr al-Mshata are now protected heritage sites, with Qasr Amra proudly wearing its UNESCO World Heritage designation. What appeared distant on a modern map was, in the political geography of the early Islamic Empire, an intelligent and deliberate placement, each one a chess piece carefully positioned to serve a broader design. And then, of course, there was the aesthetic. The desert castles of Jordan may no longer echo with the footsteps of caliphs, diplomats, or stargazers. Restoration projects have brought new life to crumbling walls and fading frescoes. But the work goes on, because within these weathered walls lie not only artistic and architectural splendors, but spiritual insight and cultural memory. In the broadest sense, these castles remind us that the early Islamic world was far more diverse, creative, and intellectually open than often portrayed. Today, the castles stand alone once more, surrounded by the whispering wind and the endless stillness of stone. Imagine a world without numbers, without writing, without even the concept of months or hours. The most visible and consistent cycle was the day itself. Light and dark, sunrise and sunset. A full lunar cycle, about 29.5 days, offered early humans something precious: rhythm. Some of the earliest known timekeeping artifacts date back 30,000 years. For ancient humans, the moon wasn't just a glowing disk. Archaeologists have found engraved bones and carved stones with tally marks in repeating sequences, believed to chart lunar cycles. Why the moon? Because it was visible, obvious, and constantly changing. Solar shifts were subtle. Star movements required deeper knowledge. But the moon? As societies became more complex, many cultures began to formalize lunar calendars. The calendar, even then, was not just a scientific tool, it was sacred. The moon taught us to count. And in learning to count, we learned to wait, to prepare, to hope. And now, as the day fades and silence settles around you, allow your mind to drift softly, gently like the shadows of clouds across an ancient landscape. Let go of numbers and names, of calendars and clocks. Let the hush of ancient skies and the hush of the present moment become one. With each breath, sink deeper into stillness. With each heartbeat, further into rest. There is no time here, only stillness. Only the rhythm of your breath, steady and slow, like waves brushing the shore or wind sighing through forgotten stones. You are safe. You are timeless. Let the quiet of the past wrap around you like a soft blanket. The stars are above you. The earth holds you, and all is calm. All is quiet. All is well. Sleep now, and let the stories of time carry you gently into dreams.